Have you ever wondered what goes into the technology that we use to generate renewable energy? Of course, you need to start with the research and engineering. But when it comes time to roll out, for example, a wind turbine, what materials does it take? Well, first, you're going to need concrete, and a lot of it. According to the World Bank, a 3-megawatt wind turbine needs 1,200 tons of the stuff. But then there's the metals. Inside this 3-megawatt wind turbine, there's 335 tons of steel, 4.7 tons of copper, 3 tons of aluminium, and another 2 tons of rare earth elements. So that's one wind turbine. And to replace a 500 megawatt coal power plant, you'll need about 167 of them. Before you consider the fact that wind isn't always blowing. Or before we consider that another key part of the green energy revolution is decentralized energy storage, batteries for our cars, homes, and other devices. So to not even completely replace a single coal power plant, we'd need to dig up around 258,000 tons of materials from our Earth. And humour me here, if we were to replace the world's entire current energy generation, about 18 trillion watts, with an army of these wind turbines, we'd need over 9.2 billion tons. Now, of course, the energy generation of the future isn't just going to be made up of wind turbines. It'll be a mix of solar, wind, hydropower, and likely supplemented with other non-renewable technology, like nuclear or whatever comes next in technology's march forward. But the fundamental challenge remains. We need materials to create renewable energy supplies and decarbonize our world to fight back against the climate crisis.
We've got lots of evidence of where mining has left terrible legacies.
We don't want to alter the environment too much, but we also need to know what lives there in order to be able to protect it and preserve it.
Our oceans are facing more pressures now than at any other time in human history.
From the Natural History Museum, this is Our Broken Planet, where we find out how we created some of the problems in our modern world and search for solutions from nature and science. I'm Khalil Thurlaway. In this episode, I'm going to be taking you through some of the challenges of resourcing the green economy and asking the question, how can we supply the materials required for a renewable energy future without creating excess harm to our planet? We'll be hearing about how science is working to fix the mistakes of mining past and exploring the alien depths of the ocean, which some see as an exciting new opportunity for resources, while others see it as a continuation of the unsustainable plundering of nature's bounty.
We think we're going to stop using coal and oil and gas. But actually the irony is we're going to need something else to replace that.
Richard Herrington is the Natural History Museum's research lead on resourcing the green economy. He's telling me all about what we need to build the green energy revolution.
We need new wind turbines, we need solar panels, we need hydroelectric schemes. All of these are resource hungry. We need to electrify our vehicle fleet, we need to revolutionise the way we use our transportation systems in general, and all of that needs a new type of infrastructure, which needs new materials.
So, what are some of the materials that we'll need to make this green revolution happen?
You've probably heard of some of them, rare earth metals, which we use in wind turbines. They're very specific because they're used in magnets for electric motors. We're going to need more copper, we're going to need more iron. But then there's a range of some of the elements that we've not really thought much about in the past, like lithium and cobalt and graphite, which is a form of carbon. And all of these are needed in the new technologies that are part of the energy revolution.
We've been throwing away electronics for a while now. Could we not source those metals from the stuff that we've been throwing away?
We can, and we should be. The problem is there's a growth in the market. That's the inherent problem that we've got. our demand for those metals is growing, just simply because we don't have enough to recycle for everybody to use now. At some point in time, we probably will have enough, but we don't at the moment.
And these metals, they come from the earth, and so we get them by mining. Mining has, for a long time, been a massive problem and had a lot of impact on both biodiversity and human lives. What have we been doing wrong in this process?
We've got lots of evidence of where mining has left terrible legacies. We've not really thought about mining in the right way as it actually being a temporary intervention on the earth to get some things of real use. We've never really systematically planned what does a post-mining landscape look like, and there's been less attention paid on what happens when we close a mine and a lot more attention paid on what happens when we open it. And that's because, mines have very long lives, and when they started, very often the last thing people thought about was what's going to happen when you close them.
When mines are abandoned or closed without a plan for the area's rehabilitation, you get what's called a legacy mine, which can have hugely damaging ongoing impacts on the local area. The Santo Niño mine in Tublai, situated in the north of the Philippines, is one such legacy mine. The mine, which closed in 1982, extracted copper, one of those critical metals in our transition to the green economy. The Natural History Museum is one of several organizations working on the BioPlus Mine project, which hopes to assess and counteract some of this particular location's problems.
Most of my relatives who are residing above Santo Niño mines, they migrated to other provinces because their livelihood were affected.
Manolo Vigliano is a project ambassador. He grew up in the area before the Santo Niño mine was built.
The water source were affected, it dried, because most of our water sources here are the spring. And some of the communities above Santo Niño, during the mine operation, most of their springs declined or even dried up.
Mining uses a lot of water. Dust suppression, fire control, flotation, grinding, screening, dust scrubbing, wash water, pump gland seal water, the list goes on. These are all mining processes that require water. And in Santo Niño's case, it's left indigenous local communities struggling at times. Sources of water appeared to dry up when the mine was built back in 1972.
The biggest problem now is the water.
This is Sabado Beca Jr. He represents the local indigenous community.
Before, the farmers could irrigate their own land. But when the Santo Niño was opened until it was shut down, the level of water went down. So the farmers were evicted, and now they rely on the weather.
Water quality is another critical issue around mining sites. Here's the Natural History Museum's Richard Herrington again.
When you mine, you're basically going underground to search for minerals that are really of great value. What you're doing then is you're bringing to surface rocks that have been buried deep in the earth. And unfortunately, those rocks are often very reactive when they come into contact with the water in the atmosphere. And in the case of this mine, these minerals, which are iron and copper sulfides, start to decay and break down. They produce acid, the metals dissolve, and they go into the groundwater, in the streams and so on. And so this site has particular issues with copper and zinc. And so what we're looking is, are there some interventions there that will help us to remove that from the water and at the same time actually recover those metals because they do have a value. So using microbiology, one of our research teams is looking at how we can use bacteria to bring the metals out of the water and recover those and turn the water back into something that's quality for use for farming and even drinking.
Working with the community, the scientists on the BioPlus Mine project are aiming to help rehabilitate the land for its people to prosper again.
It's all about the basic needs that they need. Water security, water use, food security, livelihood, economic, and safety, and how we can meet those basic needs before moving to the next level of their needs.
Dennis Alonso from the University of New South Wales leads the social component of the BioPlus Mine project.
It's trying to look at their knowledge in terms of rehabilitation. They've got local knowledge, but to operationalize it into a more concrete action. Because it's really hard to go to the community and impose what we believe to be the solution of the problem if we're not going to look at their aspirations, their basic needs, and address those needs.
Legacy mines are something of an epidemic worldwide, as companies extract resources and leave locals to deal with the fallout. It's estimated that there are 600,000 of them in the US alone. And while every case will have its own individual circumstances, this project could be a template for assessing and dealing with environmental hazards in other locations. Richard Herrington says we should be striving for a cradle-to-cradle approach to terrestrial mine sites.
This linear economy where we'd make things, we'd use them, and then we'd throw them away. And that is, if you like, cradle to grave as a concept. And the cradle to cradle concept is very much this idea that we start with something and we should take that product back to where it began and make it useful for reuse. Where the actual site, the mining site, should be returned back to something that has equal value to what was there when we started.
Now, this is just one example of how mining projects have negatively impacted landscapes and communities. Mining of lithium, one of the critical components of lithium-ion batteries, like we see in our phones, computers, and electric vehicles, can be hugely damaging for the natural world. Its extraction, like the Santo Niño mine, has been linked with declining water quality and damage to biodiversity. Cobalt, another critical ingredient of the lithium-ion battery, has a supply chain that has been proven to include child labor, something that doesn't get talked about enough when we're singing the praises of the green energy revolution. And it might not be the only resource with a connection to child labor. All of these arguments against traditional mining has fed an appetite for opportunities that are less damaging to people and the environment. So some might say, where better to go than where we know there's absolutely no human life? The deep sea isn't necessarily the first place you'd expect to find a mine. But to be fair, you'd be forgiven for not really expecting anything down there. So much of the depths of our oceans are alien, weird, and undiscovered. We estimate that we've only recorded around 10% of the species that live in the deep ocean, and we've barely mapped a quarter of the ocean floor. There isn't currently any commercial mining activity on the seabed, but as of 2023, there have been 31 exploration licenses granted to explore the potential viability of mining in the deep sea. 17 of these licenses focus on a part of the ocean situated between Mexico and Hawaii, the Clarion Clipperton Zone, an abyssal plain, a vast, flat area of ocean floor, roughly 4.5 million square kilometers. Earlier this year, the Natural History Museum's Adrian Glover was floating nearly 5 kilometers above it.
So I'm standing up on the bridge of the Royal Research Ship James Cook. In front of me are all kinds of dials and twinkling lights and buttons that control the entirety of this 80-metre long research vessel, state-of-the-art research boat. It's just becoming dawn here. We're out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. I can see on the map here we're over 2,000 miles from really land in any direction. And the moon is setting on one side, and just slowly the first hints of dawn coming up over from the east there. We're stationary over a single spot where we're diving with our remotely operated vehicle, our mini robot submersible, down on the seafloor 4,700 metres beneath us. And I'm going to go down now and...
can we increase the ship speed to 0.2, please?
Increase to 0.2, okay.
Thank you.
So that was the ROV team downstairs just calling up to Phil here to move the ship along a little bit faster just to keep up with us on the seabed. It's really quite remarkable how we managed to coordinate two vehicles, one small, the size of a car, driving around effectively on the seabed using thrusters, and up here a 80-metre long research ship. And I'm going to go down now and we'll see what we can see in the remotely operated vehicle, the ROV control van. So I've just walked into the control van of the remotely operated vehicle, our mini submersible. There's a hum of the instruments, and around me are an amazing number of screens. I think there's over 20 screens, all with different video feeds of the seafloor around us. I can see Brian, Eric and Beth here, the scientists on watching everything. They're looking at the seabed now. So 4,700 meters of umbilical cable connects us all the way down to the seafloor. It sends data and images and live video in full high definition to the surface here. We can actually control the ROV and the robot sub and go in any direction. Brian, have you seen anything interesting?
There's some nice xenophophores and the large crinoid.
So xenophophores are one of the most remarkable and weird animals that live on the seabed and the abyssal plain. What exactly is a foraminifera? What's a xenophophore?
So a foraminifera is a single-celled, basically amoeba that can create its own shell. Basically an armored amoeba is how I like to think of them. Xenophophore is essentially a giant one, because usually they're very tiny.
I always think that xenophophores would be sort of like a candidate for what kind of alien life form you'd find on another planet. Beth is here, she's studying the deep sea animals that live on the seabed. She's been recording images of some of the remarkable sea life. Have you seen anything exciting recently, Beth?
We had a very nice crinoid earlier. Yeah.
Crinoids are amazing, aren't they? They sort of almost don't look like animals. They look like sort of feather dusters, or they sort of like...
Or like, I don't know, they always remind me of flowers, like lilies or something.
Some of the museum scientists like myself are desperate to collect one so we can see what species it is. So we have always this sort of paradox, whether we collect something to find out what it is exactly, and we can study its genetics and its biology in more detail, or just to take a picture of it and move on. Do you think we should collect a crinoid, Beth?
Well, we've only seen 2 of these so far, so I'm more verging leaving it, but I don't know.
This is a quandary of, obviously we don't want to alter the environment too much, but we also need to know what lives there in order to be able to protect it and preserve it. And we're looking now at the seafloor, the muddy abyssal plains. In this area, they're very cold, very dark, characterized by the accumulation of these strange, mysterious mineral accretions, what we call polymetallic nodules.
Polymetallic nodules. These are the rocks that are so appealing to mining companies. Formed over millions of years and about the size of a large potato, they contain many of the essential metals for renewable energy infrastructure: cobalt, nickel, copper, and manganese. Here's Richard Herrington again.
These are found on the deep ocean floor in a number of places on the planet, but very particularly on the Pacific Ocean. And they've been a lot of attention on these in the last few years because they have enormous resources of some of the metals like cobalt, nickel and copper that we need for the energy transition.
Why are people so excited about the prospect of getting their hands on these nodules?
Because there's an enormous amount of metal there. So the Clarion Clipperton Zone, which is just one of these areas, it's got a phenomenal amount of metal there. So within those nodules, there's probably 10 years of the world's copper needs, 100 years of the world's nickel needs, 300 years of the world's manganese needs, and probably up to 450 years of the world's cobalt needs. So you can see that if we could get our hands on that metal, it would mean that we wouldn't have to mine quite so much on the terrestrial land. There's obviously large areas that have to be mined for this because they're quite thin, the zones of nodules, talking of quite large areas that need to be effectively harvested because these things sit on the ocean floor.
These nodules are something of a wonder rock for would-be deep-sea mining companies, and many await the opportunity to start, quite literally, vacuuming them up off the seafloor. But this is controversial. Environmental groups and many scientists argue that removing these rocks will damage these previously untouched regions, and that there's enough resources already on land without disturbing new locations. And it's this potential impact that makes research like Adrian's so important.
We're here studying this old mining track of a collector vehicle that was put down here in the late 1970s, and Dan Jones, who's a chief scientist on the expedition, was able to go through the literature and pinpoint exactly the position of where this was on the seafloor. So we've come to study it and see what the long-term, over decades, impact is of disturbance in an otherwise normally undisturbed environment.
The researchers aboard the James Cook study this environment not only virtually via a remote control submarine, but also through a process called box coring. It's essentially scooping a box of mud off the ocean floor and sifting through it.
Every time I do this, I'm amazed at the incredible effort it takes just to get a little cube of sediment from the seafloor and study a region of our planet that's never really been studied at all.
And a box core has just been delivered to deck.
Lift up the box core with the crane and then we'll see what's inside. It's quite a big, heavy device. It weighs about half a ton, and it's one of the bits of sampling equipment that occasionally you have to bang it with a hammer. Just going to have a look. Ooh, yeah, we've definitely got a sample. I can see mud and nodules. That's great. Linda's got a hand in a
Hello.
bucket of mud.
Yeah.
It's an amazing colour, isn't it?
It is. It really makes you want chocolate mousse or hot chocolate. Looks very edible.
That allows us to pass it through the sieve and collect some of those animals that are very small, millimetre size, or just a little bit, even less than a millimetre in some cases.
Sometimes you might find a polymetallic nodule amongst these boxes of sea sludge. But what Adrian really wants to document is the life in this area.
One of the amazing things about the abyssal plain is that it actually, on first appearance, looks rather barren. So when people first started to explore the abyss, particularly in the Pacific, they saw the muddy abyssal plains, the little nodules, the mineral accretions, and people generally thought that there was just nothing there. It wasn't really until the 1970s when the first samples were brought up, when people started to look at the little animals in the mud and then started to get the first images, pictures of the seafloor, that they realised that although the numbers of animals are very low, the number of different types of animals, the biodiversity is actually remarkably high. And we've realised just by looking through the sediments and looking at the animals living on the rocks and on the nodules themselves that there's many, many undescribed species. And in fact, we estimate over 80% of the animals that we bring up are actually species that are new to science, that are undescribed.
And some of these species have made it up from the seafloor into the lab of the James Cook.
Brian is what we call our slime expert. He called himself a slime expert, so now he has become a slime expert. Oh wow, so that beautiful photo. Describe what you can see there, Brian, on the screen. You just took a brilliant photo.
So basically it looks like a little fan-shaped fungus, but in reality it's actually a single-celled organism that is heterotrophic, meaning that it eats, it consumes, rather than creates energy from sunlight, and it makes its shell, its own body, out of other dead bodies or shells that are in the sediment.
They smell a bit like mushrooms, don't they, sometimes?
Yeah, that's kind of one thing that we're further investigating.
Have you ever eaten one? Is the important question.
No comment.
There is a professor of foraminifera who's a friend of both mine and Brian's, and we understand he has eaten one on one deep sea voyage. There does seem to be a rule at some point during one's career you need to have eaten your study organism. I think Charles Darwin started that in the 19th century.
I heard he had a lot of tummy aches.
Adrian has been on the James Cook for 34 days now. In that time, they've hauled up 39 boxes, observed hundreds of species, and taken thousands of photographs. It's this data that will help scientists work out the long-term impact of deep-sea mining.
Here is an opportunity to understand, before those decisions are made, what the impacts would be. And that's the critical thing. It's about collecting that data, collecting that information, informing everybody in the debate. Everybody has a say in it. It's a societal decision. And we want to really encourage that decision-making process to be informed really well, to have the information it needs, and for everyone to come together in a way which humanity hasn't done before, in areas beyond national jurisdiction, areas of the high seas where it doesn't belong to any nation state, to think about how the resources are there can be used in a way which is environmentally fair, economically fair, legally fair, helps at the same time to create development, to bring people out of poverty, to give people the resources and the food and the minerals and what they need to develop. But at the same time to do that in a way where we understand what those impacts are, and we minimise those impacts, and we work towards making it a sustainable operation as you possibly can.
there's immense opposition to deep-sea mining.
We will be conducting safe and peaceful protests today against your vessel because you are enabling the industry before deep-sea mining has even been approved by governments.
On the way back from this expedition, the James Cook encountered a protest.
Greenpeace took peaceful protest and took peaceful action against this expedition as it was returning to port because we are very concerned that the deep-sea mining industry is really trying to use and co-opt deep-sea science to pave a way for this destructive industry.
This is Greenpeace's Louisa Casson, the leader of their campaign to stop deep-sea mining.
Our oceans are facing more pressures now than at any other time in human history. And so the idea of sending giant bulldozers and tank-like machines kilometres down below the surface of the waves into the incredible, mysterious, magical ecosystems of the deep sea feels like a really terrible idea, particularly at this point in history. While deep-sea mining hasn't started anywhere yet, we're already seeing incredibly concerning warnings from scientists that mining the deep sea would lead to irreversible and unavoidable biodiversity loss. These are not the words we want to be hearing when we're already in a nature and a climate crisis. I think the risks of pollution, from stirring up sediment down in the deep ocean to releasing it back into the water column, having impacts on not just deep sea creatures, but other amazing marine life, the noise, the light in an area that's one of the very last few relatively untouched wildernesses on our planet, really needs to give us cause for concern.
The International Seabed Authority, established in 1994 and made up of 167 members, is the governing body of the international deep sea. Created as part of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, the ISA's job is to protect the seabed and to control resource extraction in the deep sea.
This is made up of governments all across the world. It's based in Kingston in Jamaica, and governments meet there to talk about what should happen in the international seabed. And pretty uniquely, the international seabed has the legal status of the common heritage of humankind. I mean, it's technically written as the common heritage of mankind, but we're going to call it the common heritage of humankind. Let's modernise it a little bit.
We can be the change in language we want to see.
Exactly. That means that governments have some pretty strong obligations that, while they are talking at this regulator about should they allow deep sea mining to start or not, they need to consider, are they able to effectively protect the oceans, and are they able to really serve the interests of not just humanity right now, but future generations.
And the meeting of the ISA in July 2023 was one like no other.
This year is a really pivotal year for the deep sea mining industry because deep sea mining companies thought this was the year that they were going to get to start the firing gun for this industry. 2 years ago, a front runner in the industry, a Canadian registered company called the Metals Company, working with the state of Nauru, triggered this 2-year loophole. And this essentially set a commercial ultimatum for governments that expired in July 2023 and said, by that point, either governments need to agree a mining code which would formally open up the International Seabed Authority to allow deep sea mining to start, or they would plan to put in a mining application themselves, even with absolutely no rules or regulations in place.
The 2-year loophole that Louisa is describing here is a regulation set out in the 1994 founding agreement of the International Seabed Authority. It allows member states to push the ISA to adopt a set of regulations for governing the exploitation, or in other words, mining, of the international seabed. This was an unexpected development for ISA members, coming from a much smaller player compared to some of the other countries on the ISA Council.
The industry were being very bullish. They were making a lot of statements to their investors and to the media saying, we're going to get the go-ahead. We're going to have mining machines entering the ocean in 2024, 2025. This is the start of deep-sea mining.
But 2 years have now come and gone, and the ISA has agreed on a new target for finalising the rules: July 2025.
The industry does not have a green light to go ahead. There are no rules or no mining code in place that would allow them to start. While the legal loophole is still open, so technically they could still put in an application to start mining, it's become very clear that it's incredibly politically controversial. And we now actually have over 20 governments from the Pacific, from Latin America, from Europe, who are saying they want to see a pause or a moratorium or even a ban on this industry. So I think actually what we're seeing is it's really ignited a wave of resistance to the very idea of deep sea mining.
And so you mentioned that this loophole is still open. So what was the conclusion of the meeting? What came from it?
So governments agreed a couple of decisions. They, were very clear that they do not want to see mining start without a mining code. But, industry was still pushing very hard for governments to keep on negotiating. We have, this coalition of governments saying, wow, we need to put the brakes on this industry. But we also do have on the other side a handful of governments who are supporting the industry, really pushing for, a stronger language that commits to allow deep sea mining to start.
Politics aside, the data is still under review. But the mining companies are keen to point out the potential of this new area of exploration. The metals company's CEO has described these nodules as a battery in a rock and made claims that deep-sea mining is potentially a more environmentally friendly way of approaching the challenges of resourcing the green economy. It's an evocative message, but one that pressure groups like Greenpeace don't buy.
The deep sea mining industry is really asking us to take a leap of faith and believe a lot of their hype. So at the moment, all we see is a long list of risks, whether that is environmental risks to the ocean, to ocean health ecosystem, both in the deep sea and throughout the water column, or social risks to communities, to governments that could be held liable if things go wrong. And so the idea of governments signing off on a mining code in an ecosystem we're still understanding, we're discovering more about how wonderful it is with practically every expedition that goes down there. It's incredibly irresponsible to be giving a green light to deep sea mining at this stage, particularly when it's very, very uncertain. Would there be any benefits, or would we simply be digging ourselves a deeper hole?
One of the arguments being made by those in favour of deep sea mining is that terrestrial land-based mining is famously hugely problematic in terms of its negative effects on not just the environment, but the lives and livelihoods of people living in those areas and downriver of them. So maybe deep sea mining could be the lesser of two evils, the shinier of two turds. What would you say to that?
So I think, within that argument, again, we can see the deep sea mining industry admitting that it will be hugely destructive. I think if we're going to learn any lessons from the huge destruction of mining on land, it's not that we should deepen and expand that destructive activity. It's that we need to find alternatives that actually reduce harm and don't create these sort of sacrifice zones, which are totally unacceptable.
There's no doubt if you go and mine nodules off the ocean floor, you will kill organisms and you'll devastate the site.
Here's Richard Herrington again.
Rather like when we build a supermarket or housing estate on a piece of land, we kill organisms, we destroy ecosystems. What we have to be really careful about is that in the scale of things, what we're not doing is destroying whole ecosystems that are irreplaceable.
So how do we calculate those risks and balance them?
Well, exactly. As a scientist, we can provide the data, but society needs to make that decision. Obviously, we've got a climate emergency. We've got a planetary emergency. We need to solve that. So I'm absolutely committed to the fact that we need an energy revolution. So we need the metals. So I think we can't get away from that fact. The next stage is, where are they going to come from? And so we need to decide, let's put the ocean floor as a possibility against the terrestrial sites and see whether we can make a rational choice between the two. But what that does mean is we need the same information in both those scenarios. And at the moment, I don't think we have the same information on the deep ocean that we do have on a terrestrial mine site.
Yeah, well, the deep ocean is one of the places that we know the least about of anywhere.
Sure. So, my feeling is we need that information. Then we can start to say, well, what if we take the metals from the deep ocean versus what if we take it from the Brazilian rainforest? Because we're going to have to make that kind of decision, unfortunately.
But let's return now to the blockade of the James Cook research vessel, where scientists like the Natural History Museum's Adrian Glover were working to find out what's down in the deep sea. Why target a research vessel?
We looked at what the UK deep sea mining company, who were involved in this project, how they were talking about this expedition. And they were very clear that this was part of their industrial exploration program, that this for them was part of their development. This was gathering information which they want to use to put into a mining application to press ahead with deep sea mining. So we're very concerned that they were a key project partner. But also, this expedition that took place, it returned to port at the time when governments were actually talking about whether to allow deep sea mining or not.
Another of Greenpeace's concerns with the research mission stems from perceptions of neo-colonialism in mining. One of the activists, a Maori person, swam in front of the vessel with a flag reading, "Don't mine the moana." For Maori, the moana, the ocean, has huge cultural significance. And even the name of the vessel, the James Cook, can read as an insult to many indigenous peoples in the Pacific, whose lives were forever changed by the British colonial project. James Cook was the captain of the HMS Endeavour, a research ship which, in the voyage of discovery between 1768 and 1771, explored much of the Pacific and revealed incredible biological discoveries. Officially, the expedition was undertaken in the pursuit of science, to observe a celestial phenomenon, the transit of Venus. However, Cook had a secret mission, to search for and claim the continent now known as Australia, and to take the opportunity to claim any South Pacific land before Britain's rival European powers. Cook's mission was a success for the British, but led to the deaths of countless indigenous peoples and a struggle to preserve their cultures that persists into the modern age.
I think having a deep sea mining research expedition that is on a ship named after the most notorious colonizer of the Pacific Ocean and Pacific peoples, James Cook, is really a cruel insult. And I think that is why Indigenous activists on board working with Greenpeace felt so compelled to literally put their bodies in the waters of the Moana, the waters of the Pacific, to defend it, because they are seeing that for far too long, Indigenous communities in the Pacific have been pushed aside and totally excluded from decision-making in their territories, on their lands, in their waters. And they're seeing that happen again with deep sea mining.
Now, while the idea of deep sea mining is contentious politically, socially, and environmentally, we're still left with the central problem. We need to find a way to resource the green economy. And we need to do it in a way that minimizes the harm to our planet. Prominent voices around the world have called for deep sea mining as a way to minimize harm to people, including Avatar and Titanic director James Cameron.
Now, obviously, the difference with the ocean floor is that we don't have people living down there. And you probably saw the article by James Cameron, where he actually appears to be coming out in favour of going to the deep ocean rather than going on to land, because, as he points out, some of the terrestrial mines are in areas where it's infecting the lives of Indigenous people. So there's another dimension to it that we need to think about, the social side. And when you put that into the mix, it makes the discussions even more complex.
The expedition aboard the RSS James Cook was funded by the Natural Environment Research Council, a British research council that supports research, training, and knowledge transfer activities in the environmental sciences. Research partners included independent organisations such as the Natural History Museum, with project partners including UK Seabed Resources, a deep-sea mining company whose exploratory licence in the Clarion Clipperton Zone was sponsored by the United Kingdom. Each of the organisations on the vessel conducted their own independent research, and the NHM's findings will be published openly. A lot of the funding for this research into the potential implications of deep-sea mining is coming from the mining industry itself. This might undermine people's trust in the independence of the work. What do you think about this, and is there another way that we could fund this research?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. Obviously, people have compared it to the tobacco industry funding research into cigarettes. But actually what we've got here is that there is independent money coming in. So the Britain's own Research Council have funded money to work on the deep ocean. But one of the big issues is that in order to study the deep ocean floor, you need to get down to the ocean floor with the right kind of technologies. And unfortunately, the only way in some of these areas is to work directly with the mining companies. So in the absence of that type of equipment available in another way, the mining companies have to be involved. And so it's unfortunate. The work is being done totally independently that's going on at the Natural History Museum. There's no control by the companies as to what data might get published. But I also do think that this is such a sufficiently important subject that we should be looking to get independent funding to do this research and do it rapidly. I think the world should be funding this work to actually see what is down on the deep ocean floor. I mean, we're talking of billions and billions of pounds here of the value of these metals. So to come up with something like £100 million to do the right research on that deep ocean floor, to look at the biodiversity and its impacts, would surely be worthwhile to enable us to make these judgment calls based on scientific evidence. Then we can start to make the decision. Because actually it may come down to that. It may come down to having to make the choice between a terrestrial site that we think is problematic and a deep ocean site that seems to be problematic.
Throughout this episode, we've explored the challenges of resourcing the green economy. And it's clear there's no agreement when it comes to deep-sea mining. But there's also no easy answers when it comes to extracting resources as we have done in the past. There's a cost to everything. Something I find difficult to grapple with personally is the apparent necessity of continuing to find resources in a system that enriches some and hurts others around the world. But it's a reality that we may need to accept in order to take steps to minimize long-term harm. The data is crucial. If we're to even consider mining the deep sea, then we need to be absolutely sure that we don't upset the delicate balance of our oceans, which is already under threat, or lose the precious biodiversity of species, of which we hardly know anything about. And we're yet to see a convincing plan of how to do that. The mining industry is asking us to take a "trust me bro" approach, but history is littered with the unintended and unforeseen consequences of our hubris and greed. It's critical that we listen to activists like Greenpeace, but it's also crucial that we don't let ideology completely squeeze out pragmatism. Whether we like it or not, those of us on the side of environmental justice will sometimes need proximity to mining companies, whether on land or in the deep ocean, to ensure that we can minimize impacts and not leave more scars on our world and our communities. It's always important to scrutinize anything with a profit motive. Mining companies have broken our trust over and over again in the past, so they're going to have to work pretty hard to rebuild that trust if we're going to work together to find a way towards a greener future. But together, maybe we can find a way through if we listen to the science. We need long-term planning, we need unbiased research, and we need to always keep in mind the goal of a sustainable future for all. Together, we can do it. Thanks for listening to Our Broken Planet. We hope you've learned something along the way, and please don't despair. We all have an important role to play in helping to fix the problems in our world, and it starts with having conversations like the ones in this episode, as many as possible. If you found it helpful, why not share this episode with your friends and family? Let us know what you thought about this episode and join the conversation on social media using the hashtag OurBrokenPlanet, or check out the bonus content and resources over on nhm.ac.uk/podcast. Over the last 9 episodes, we've explored how nature is faring as a result of human activity across the globe, from the deepest depths of the Pacific Ocean to the ice sheets at the top of our world. And it's clear to see why scientists have declared a planetary emergency. In next week's series finale, we'll be looking at what we can actually do about it. This episode of Our Broken Planet was presented by me, Khalil Thurlaway. The producer was James Tyndale, and the executive producer was Will Yates. Our Broken Planet is a Whistledown production for the Natural History Museum.